Hi, dear monastic friends and lay friends. My name is Leah, and I'm active with Extinction Rebellion and the Last Generation in Berlin. And one thing we do is gluing ourselves to the highway to block the cars. This is civil disobedience. It's done in a non-violent way, or rather say peaceful way. But of course, people are very annoyed and they get very angry. And so the question that I want to ask is, how can we know that we're on the right track when the reactions are so negative? Because of course we don't want to make people suffer. And I'm just asking myself if it's the right way, how can we know? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I feel a lot of gratitude to the civil disobedience protesters. So whoever you are out there, thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your sacrifice of time and energy and your action from the heart. I feel this is a koan, a question, actually to bring back to the groups. And it's a question that we may never have always an answer for eternity, but we have an answer from month to month. How can we express our love? How can we express the strength of our action? In Zen, we say sometimes the Zen master has to shout or shake the students to kind of wake us up. And I think the protesters, you are playing that role of trying to shake us and wake us up. And so the question is, how can we take the kind of actions that have that effect? So is the gluing and the blocking traffic having the effect of shaking up society and waking us up? And something coming up in me is when I used to do peace protests as a teenager. At that time it was around the Iraq War. And we used to stand in silence in city centers. There was a movement called Women in Black that I was a part of, and we would just stand in silence to protest violence and war. And even that silence was really provocative. I think we're having some issues with the French translation volume. Some of our friends are being deafened. So sometimes even that, I was aware that even to be silent was provoking anger, and people would come up to us and shout angrily. And I did a lot of deep looking. Am I standing here in a provocative, angry way? And I think it's okay to be provocative, but is there a way that we can also offer people something they want? So I just wonder, and I know this happens a lot in Extinction Rebellion, but how can we block the roads and offer like an exquisite concert in the middle of the road? Or how can we offer a beautiful dance? How can we offer something that people are thirsty for? And at the Standing Rock protests, I remember there was a lot of ceremonies that were done like in circles in front of the lines of police. So instead of just being in opposition to the authorities and the law enforcement, how can we generate something that is in itself inspiring, life-affirming, and giving to people what we're most thirsty for, which is meaning, a spiritual dimension, beauty, community, togetherness. So instead of maybe just a few people gluing themselves, how can it really be to think, and it may take a lot more organization, but so that actually the offering itself is adding beauty to the world, adding wonder, adding spirituality, and adding depth. And that takes a whole community of us, of protesters, of awakened people. And that then really becomes what we would call in Buddhism skillful means. So that as soon as people hear the soundtrack of that protest, as soon as they see the images, they are inspired. You see, what the images that come into the consciousness, the sounds, are already something that lifts up their spirits, and they feel compassion and kinship, rather than not another person gluing themselves to the road or to a door or to a train. So that is our challenge, because we are protesting in the realm of consciousness. So how can every aspect of our protest water the right seeds in consciousness, so that people who want to wake up can find it inspiring to wake up with us? And I'm sure we can work it out together. And I feel maybe we're not there yet, and it's okay to say we haven't yet found those ways of protest yet. But let us keep discussing it and coming up with new ways to do it, and bringing all our love and creativity so that we are super inspiring. And I think of the civil rights marches, and I recently had a chance to see one of these old videos. They were walking at the pace of walking meditation, linking arms, and the music is so beautiful. And people's faces are so full of spirit. And just watching, so I go onto YouTube and enjoy some old civil rights movement protest videos march videos from the US. And you think, yeah, just watching that video, your spirit lifts and soars. And you think, yeah, this is a movement of awakening, of love, of compassion, of community, of togetherness. And I think in our generation, we need to find what that spiritual, inspiring, heartfelt movement will look like. And that is the true non-violence, not just I'm not hitting someone non-violence, but in our hearts, it's also full of compassion and not kind of repressed aggression that's even just in the hearts or faces of the protesters. So this is a koan that we're working on together. Thank you for the question.
Dear Thai, dear Sangha, dear sisters and brothers, dear friends, my name is Sasha, and I was born in Russia and grew up in Russia and live in India too. But since I live a few years near Plum village, my way of seeing the things had changed. And recently I find it very difficult to come back to my own country, and country like India or other countries where there is no recycling system at all. And so I was recently in Srinagar in G20, and it's in Kashmir, and I find myself very difficult to be around a lot of rubbish everywhere. And also how people are using, because I live with the local people, of course, at home. And my question is how to deal with my personal suffering first, how to not to hurt myself, because I cannot avoid it. It's everywhere, and in my country it's also the case. We don't have recycling system at all, so people put everything in the same bin or drop it out. We are lucky we have a lot of land, but it's not a solution. And one case was very difficult for me. It's when I live with a Kashmiri family, and the woman, we live in the lake, and the boats, and people just drop the waste in the lake where they live, and also open the water, and it's dropping all day. And I didn't want to hurt my friend, but I'm always trying to close. But she said, it's okay, it's from the mountains, it's for free. So my question is how to be humble and not to be so intrusive when you go in different places where your view of seeing the things are not the same. Yes, and how to let go of it, but maybe also how to make some little actions from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sasha, for your question. I had a recent situation like yours. I grew up in Canada, and for a long time, I also never really felt at home in Vietnam. And it's been a spiritual journey to finding our root connection is a very important practice in our tradition. And we always have to come to ourselves to understand why we are feeling irritated, feeling annoyed, and take care of those mental formations that manifest. And recently, in March, I had the chance to come home to Vietnam. And it was not my first time, but it was the first time I came with real openness. I came to see the country as it is, and not with my own idea of what I think is a quote-unquote civilized world. And I grew up in the West, so I was cultivated with a particular thought of how life should be. Already in the past trips, when I came home, I went with that mentality. I never felt at home. I felt like a foreigner, and I felt like somebody coming with a view from outside, and already there is discrimination, there is distancing. And it's very easy to look and to see the negative, to see things that are not beautiful. So my practice this time is to come home and to see the beauty, the good qualities that are all there already. And then when I met the same exact situation like yours, I was in an island called Phu Quoc. And luckily, I was not at a tourist place. I was in the heart of where all of the villagers, they live. And everywhere was plastic. Everywhere was garbage. The old Phap would have been very angry and would have been very judgmental and criticizing. And with that mentality, I only harm myself. I only distance myself. But actually, in that moment, I felt so much love and compassion. And I asked myself, how can I help? How can I support? Coming from a space of wanting to help is very different than coming a place of complaining as well as judging. And this is how I've learned to meet situations where it is difficult and it is not what we see is should be for the environment, for nature, for the well-being. And I had an opportunity to see somebody throw trash into the river. And I came and I asked, oh, why do you do this? From not a judgmental place. And the friend said, well, all I've been taught is when there's trash, we just throw it into the river and it leads to the ocean and the ocean takes care of it. But in that moment, I wasn't angry. I had understanding. Oh, this is what you've been told. This is all you know. And they don't know there is a process to recycle. There is a process of caring for the garbage. And they don't see the suffering. So in that moment, taking time to explain, to share, and how you are doing it is very important. As a practitioner, this is when we come home. I did recognize irritation. I recognize some anger. And I breathe and I allow my understanding. If I was in that situation without the education, without the knowledge I have, I would do the exact same thing. So from understanding, you have a bridge to connect from heart to heart. So anytime we meet these particular situation and we want to help, check and make sure that the helping is coming from understanding, love, and oneness. Because in that moment, you can divide yourself, I am educated and they are not. And we judge. That doesn't help. But if we see, oh, can I share? Can I explain? And we also have to have patience and readiness to understand if they're not yet ready, but we keep doing it. I have an aspiration to create trash retreat, transforming trash inside and trash outside. And I really want to do that. I really just want to grab 50 of us, we go to places and we just clean and clean and clean. Because we have so much compost we need to do daily here. And I met a wonderful person who I shared that aspiration, and she shared with me that she had 3 friends, they called the 3 monkeys. And they made this commitment to help a mountain in Vietnam to clean the trash. The first 2 months was very difficult. They wanted to give up because after 10 days of clean, the habit was so profound that trash just arrived the next day and the next day. But by the consistency of care and cleaning, you are changing the collective. When you start to see there's no more trash, you start to see how beautiful this land can be without trash, there's transformation. And after 2 years of consistency and not giving up, there's no more trash there. So there is change within the action, even though we don't see it right away. And for system change, for collective change, it is something that we have to do daily. That's what I have arrived at. And we also have to be very careful of what we're bringing from the West. I had an awakening moment. I wanted to give my grandmother a hot pack so that she can put on her sore muscles. And in my home in the countryside, they don't have a microwave. So with my Western mind, I'm like, I got money. Let me buy you a microwave because every house should have a microwave. And my uncle was like, no, 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 we don't need it. We don't need it. And I keep pushing for it. And then one day he said, don't worry, my nephew. We'll find a way to heat this pack. I don't believe the microwave is the way. It was a moment of awakening for me. I realized that our happiness, our idea of what is right and wrong is very limited, especially when we go back to home or we go to communities, civilization, countryside. We should be open. We should see, we should feel, and not to be so sure. So recently, the calligraphy, "Are you sure?" has been my compass. Every time I think I have the answer, "Are you sure?" So I think with this question, this koan that we ask ourselves is, are you sure this is the only way? Because there can be many ways. So every time we meet a difficulty, see how it is caring for our own heart. Take time to take care of the irritation, the mental formations that manifest. Breathe with it. Allow understanding to be present. From clarity, our action, our approach comes from understanding and compassion. It is very different. And that is healing and transforming yourself and allowing others to see a new way. If we are bringing a new way, we can bring it from a place where there can be understanding and communication. And to listen. And from that, we will have more kindness in our hearts. These works, sometimes I feel it can water the seed of hatred in us. So that's how I take care of myself. Coming home, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. We're not different. When we work in this space, there is energy to nourish ourselves and nourish others. Thank you.
Cher Thaï, cher Sangha, je suis très émue. Bon. Hier, après le très bel enseignement de Phap, j'ai ouvert mon téléphone portable et en fait, je me suis aperçue qu'aujourd'hui, le Parlement français, sous l'égide de Macron, va voter une loi pour la dissolution des mouvements de la Terre, des soulèvements de la Terre. Des soulèvements de la Terre, qui sont un mouvement écologiste, et que certaines... Okay.
So yesterday, after the Dharma talk, I opened my phone and I saw that today, under the guidance of Macron, the Parliament is going to vote to dissolve an ecological movement to protect Mother Earth called the Soulèvement de la Terre, the rising up of the Earth. So they're going to ban it, I guess, or dissolve it.
Et aussi qu'à la ZAD Notre-Dame-des-Landes, il y a des activistes du soulèvement de la Terre qui ont été arrêtés.
And in ZAD, c'est zone de développement, quelque chose, non?
Zone à défendre.
Zone à défendre, ok. Donc c'est une zone sensible, écologique ou...
Oui, où il y a eu beaucoup de... la ZAD de Notre-Dame-des-Landes est très connue des Français parce qu'il y a eu beaucoup d'activistes qui ont été là pour empêcher un aéroport de se faire et l'aéroport ne s'est pas fait.
So in a specific region in the Landes, which is in the southwest of France, that many activists over many years have been trying to protect, several activists have been arrested.
Et je suis très en colère et je me sens très impuissante.
And I'm very angry and I feel very powerless.
Parce que le président Macron est en train de devenir de plus en plus autoritaire.
Because President Macron is becoming more and more authoritarian.
Et je ne peux pas lui parler directement pour toucher son cœur.
Speak to him directly to touch his heart.
J'ai fait un travail en essayant de le voir comme un petit enfant de 5 ans. Et j'ai eu un peu de compassion. Mais là, la colère est remontée hier soir.
I did some work to see him as a 5-year-old child. But and I had a little bit of compassion. But then anger came up again.
Et quoi faire? Qu'est-ce que je peux faire?
What can I do? Recently, I watched again a clip of Thai answering somebody's question. Somebody who'd been sexually abused and who was trying to deal with their anger towards the abuser. And Thai recounted again the story of when he received the news of a young girl being raped on one of the refugee boats coming from Vietnam by a pirate, and how she threw herself into the ocean to commit suicide afterwards, and how her father also then threw himself into the ocean to commit suicide. And I think anybody who's been in Plum Village a while, we know that story. It's not as if I didn't know that story. I already knew it. But when Thai was recounting it, I realized that I hadn't really done what Thai did. I understood it. I understood that Thai had done that. And okay, so in case you don't know that story, it is the origin of the poem "Please Call Me by My True Name." Thai realized that he had to go on a very deep journey of understanding, to try to understand how could somebody do this to a young girl, defenseless. How could somebody be so cruel, so heartless? So Thai visualized himself growing up in a poor fishing village on the coasts of Thailand, and maybe the economy changing and then having no job or not being able to make enough money to support a family, selling fish. And then hearing that there are boat people going past the coast who are defenseless, and they may be carrying, maybe you hear rumors that they have gold or valuables. And you hear that other people have gone and they've been able to steal from them and get rich. And so you think, or you get persuaded, maybe I'll go too. And then you find yourself in that situation. So Thai visualized as if it was himself going through every step of this process. And somehow this time, as Thai was describing it, I actually did it myself. I went through that same process. And I came to the inevitable conclusion that if I was in that position, I would also do the same thing. It was very, like, I'd heard Thai say it before, and I go, oh yes, yes, wow, that's so profound. Thai really understood, that's, wow, what a deep teaching on into being. Like, I got it, but I hadn't done it, not really. So I realized, also, it's not enough just to do it once, We have to, our idea of our separation is so strong. It's so constantly reinforced by having a name and a passport and an identity card and a role, and that if we really want to transcend that idea, if we really want to touch our nature of interbeing, we have to do the work, and we have to do it again and again and again. And I think you had the right idea. You were doing it already. You were seeing him as a 5-year-old child. So you were making that effort to bridge the gap, to understand where does this apparent indifference come from, or this tendency towards maybe authoritarian behavior. Where does it come from? But we need to keep going. Don't give up. We need to keep going until we understand. Until we see that there is no separation between us and him, and in a sense we are co-responsible. Even though we don't agree, and we are sure that we wouldn't do that. Right? I have to really contemplate this because I have a member of my family who's moving into politics in France. And I have to be careful. I don't know how much I can say here. This is going to go online, but he's had many meetings with President Macron. He's not that far away. And I have to ask myself, how is it that he and I can have such different attitudes, when we're so close in other ways? And how could I reach him? Maybe I can't reach President Macron, but I could maybe reach this member of my family. So I don't exactly have an answer, but it's a sense that I think we do have the answer already. Thai has given it to us so clearly, and yet we don't quite trust it. Because if we did trust it, we would do it. We would commit fully. So what Thai said on that day is, if you can do this, if you can go through this process and really see that in those circumstances you would have done the same thing, you will become a bodhisattva. Right? So, yeah, it's a lot of work, right? But that's the challenge. How do we know? Is Thai telling the truth? How do we know? There's only one way for us to find out.
Dear beloved Thầy, dear Sangha, I have a question. I know in this past week we've been talking a lot about building communities, which is the concept of a Sangha, where the Sangha can live together in a harmonious way. And if my understanding is correct, there were elements that I picked up that we sometimes we could have deferring opinions to somebody else and leave it at that because people have different opinions. So that's the idea of kind of agreeing to disagree. And I think my question is, how can you agree to disagree when there is one... So I think, in my opinion, agreeing to disagree only works when the two opinions are neutral. For example, I want to eat with a pink fork, and someone wants to eat with a green fork. But then, for me, agreeing to disagree doesn't work when someone has a sentiment that harbors hatred. For example, I might be talking to somebody and their opinion about the situation might harbor a lot of hatred or racism or some sort of division or some harm to some other party. To expand a little bit on this question, I've kind of come to notice that there's a real power in the Sangha, and the Sangha would be able to help us do things that we ourselves cannot do alone. I think I've realized that my wound lies in the collective, and as a Vietnamese Australian person, I've never felt really accepted wherever I was living, whether it was in Vietnam or in Australia. And I desperately feel like I long for the collective to embrace me, but the collective does not embrace me. And I would be willing to work with the collective. But there are parts of the collective ideas that are so sexist and discriminative in some way. And so how do we go about kind of working with the collective when agreeing to disagree and one side has more power imbalance than the other? Thank you very much.
Sister Hien looks at me because I haven't said anything. I feel very grateful to be with all of you in this retreat. I didn't need to register, and I can attend this retreat in person. And I come to this retreat with a very open mind to learn. And before the retreat started, in my routine activities, I had the chance to read again the Diamond Sutra. Yesterday, Brother Phap Linh talked about the practice to transcend the concepts of self, of human beings, of animals, and Sister Nghiem also mentioned about it. And I was very moved every time I read the Diamond Sutra. And I would like to tell you what moved me. The Buddha, that sutra tells us the story when the Buddha was sitting with the whole assembly of his students. And Subhuti, one of the students, asked the Buddha a question. Dear Buddha, for those who want to give rise to the highest mind of awakening, of love, what should they rely on? How do they practice? And reading that question right away, I think of you all. Those who come to this retreat, who participate in this retreat, whether in person or online, you are here because you want to cultivate that highest mind of awakening and love. And that student of the Buddha, he also mentioned the name Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattvas who aspire to give rise to that highest mind. How should they practice? And Bodhisattva means great being, those who want to love, to serve, to help the whole world. And that question really struck right my heart. It's very concrete, very easy to understand. What should we rely on? What kind of practice? And the last few days, our brother Phap, Linh, sister Nghiem, and others, our panelists, talk about it. We need to transcend we need to train ourselves to look at things, to think in such a way that we see the others are myself, I'm the others. And the collective is the individual is the collective. Sometimes we have perceptions that we are not accepted by the collective. But do we really accept ourselves? Do we accept our own suffering? Do we accept our own weaknesses? If we accept ourselves and we are able to love ourselves, we have a feeling of well-being, and we can be in harmony with others very easily. And the answer of the Buddha, I would like to share with you. Thank you. That sutra is in this Chanting from the Heart, the new edition, published by Parallax Press. The reason why I say it, because in many retreats, our friends kept asking me, oh, what book should I read? And so now, to answer to make one answer, to give one answer for everyone. So the Buddha answered very clearly. To summarize, Subhuti, a bodhisattva, if he or she still has the notion that a self, a person, a living being, or a life sense exists, that person is not a true bodhisattva. And how do we know that we are practicing? How do we know that we have practice, or we can remove all those notions or the separation between myself and the others? We can just look at our relationship between us and our friends, our family members. Just last month, I was with my mom and my blood sisters. My mom and my blood sisters have attended many retreats, and they have heard about the practice of deep listening, of loving speech, of reconciliation, and they practice, they study and practice. But still, there's something, some blockage in them. And a sister sat with them and told them a story. A very close friend to her also came to that retreat, and he had a deep wish to tell his father that I love you. After practicing a lot to transform the suffering, very deep suffering and pains, and he wanted to tell his father that I love you. And he had the intention, and suddenly his father had a stroke and was hospitalized right away. And he ran to the hospital waiting for that moment to tell his father, Father, I love you. After practicing many years, he really wanted to say it with his whole heart. And he waited and he waited until the moment the doctor went out and let him know that his father passed away. And he just stood there and cried and cried and cried. So that sister told my mom and my sister that story and told them that if you have something in your heart that you want to tell someone you really love, just say it right away. Don't wait. Don't wait. And so my mother right away asked that sister to sit with her the next day so that she can tell my sister what she wants to tell. And my sister also wanted to go to that morning, and for the first time, after so many years, my mom approached my sister and said that, my child, I love you. I apologize that during your childhood I was not kind. I was so busy. I was not kind at all. I caused lots of suffering to you. And she put her hand on my sister's head and caressed her hair. And my sister was like a fountain. She cried and cried and cried. And she thought that she had worked a lot on herself, and she had, for many years, she had worked on to transform her pain, and she practiced to accept my mom as she is, and she thought that she has transformed her suffering. But at that time, she cried, and after that, she felt like a huge mountain. She put down a huge mountain from her shoulders. She felt so light. And she cried, and she also apologized, my mom. Mommy, I also love you, and I apologize for all the expectation that I carried in my heart. And both of them cried, and they didn't say much. They didn't need to go back to the past to talk about all the old stories, but they felt so light. And their relationship suddenly changed. And they felt really that daughter is mom, mom is daughter. And I and the other sisters, we were so happy. They they began anew. And it was exactly like I began anew with my mom, with my sister. The whole family was so happy. Only two of them sat together, and the whole family, we felt that we were there. We also transformed the suffering in ourselves. And we felt the connectedness and the nature of interbeing. And we thought that, yes, we have been working and practice on reconciliation on ourselves. And my sister also thought that she didn't need to have a session with my mom. She worked on herself. So many lay friends were very moved during the last few days when we listened to the letter, the love letter to the earth. And I think we need to also to write a letter to one person in our family. And looking at our relationship with our family members, we see how much we can remove the barrier between me and the others. And the others are those we love the most. They are most close to us. So looking deeply at our relationship with our family members, we can see and we can continue to work to practice, to transform, and to rely on the practice of non-self. Because if our relationship with our family members and our closest friends reveals that we are not caught in those notions of me, of the other, and then we know that on the long path of activism, we can go far. If not, we need to focus on ourselves more and more to work. And we can do both at the same time. There's no separation with our activities as an activist and the practice. Both ways are mingled together, but we remember to, looking at our relationship, we remember to practice and never be far away from the path of practice. The two paths are together. And same thing, when we make a decision, living in a community, in a meeting, with the sisters, we have many different ideas. And when I listen deeply to my sister's ideas, even though they are very different of mine, but I see that her idea is a reality. It's something in a reality in my community, in my home, in myself. There are different ideas. So I don't see the other idea is different from my idea, but I see all the ideas as a whole. It's my home, my home's ideas. So I try to combine all the ideas together. We can never have a perfect decision, but we try to make a decision in such a way that there's harmony, in such a way that everyone is included. And we always learn on the path to improve our decision. We are not stuck with that decision. And in our daily life, we will experience, we will see whether that decision is the best. If it's not the best, we still have the freedom to modify, to achieve a better decision. And for me, the best decision is the inclusive and harmonious decision. And if we are still caught in right and wrong, and it's not the best decision, because when we are caught in the notion of right and wrong, there's still duality, discrimination, and we don't have the freedom. Our heart is not free to be open, to listen, and to embrace all the ideas. Please feel free to add.
Thank you, dear Siko. I'm so moved. I think there's someone in my family I have to write a letter to. I'm sure many of us feel the same. There's just one thread I want to pick up on, which is how to find, how to find freedom in the face of these different views. And when you speak about collective and we can feel discriminated by the collective, sometimes that collective can be our own family, sometimes it can be our workplace, sometimes it can be our society or our politicians for the French. Oh, for everyone. So how do we find freedom? And actually I find Thai's life example like so deeply inspiring. And sometimes Thai would speak about how people would accuse him of so many different things. During the war, everyone would accuse him of being on the other side or on this side or being funded by the CIA and all these things. And he was criticized, he was betrayed. And yet Thai doesn't present as someone who's a victim of the world, right? Thai found his freedom inside. And that was always so fascinating for me. And I think he can be a real inspiration for all of us in the face of discrimination, how to be free. And how to, he used this phrase, reclaim our sovereignty. And what's interesting, I think, is once Thai reclaimed his inner sovereignty, then he can take actions to help transform discrimination in society. So to rewrite the 5 mindfulness trainings so that hundreds of thousands of people can cultivate non-discrimination in society, to create retreats for people of color, for veterans, for teachers, for young people, so that everyone can learn how we can each be a bodhisattva of non-discrimination. And so Thai was acting in the world to transform discrimination, while at the same time touching his own freedom. And the theme of this retreat is love is freedom. So there's something I think also to do with the compassion for ourselves that can allow us, as Sister Nghiem was saying, to accept ourselves, to not believe that discrimination. We don't internalize it. So as a practitioner, you have that agency to accept yourself as a wonder of life, as a beautiful flower in the garden of humanity, to really deeply practice to believe and accept that in yourself, to accept your family, to accept your society, to accept all the threads of your roots. And as Dinh was saying, this is a work in progress, I think, for many of us, how to deepen and deepen and deepen our practice of self-acceptance. So we have freedom, and in the face of discrimination, we don't get caught up in that fight and that struggle, but we really are sovereign. And I think our energy of mindfulness, our energy of breathing, stability, and peace, even right in the face of discrimination, you and we can still be a free person. And whether that's gender discrimination or racial discrimination, cultural or political discrimination, I think as a practitioner we find our inner unshakable truth, and that's where we stand. And then having a community to support us keeps us like not deluded. You know, you have like a reality check from the people around you. So having good allies is really important. But simply our mindful breathing, our mindful steps, and our inner solidity can give us freedom in some really difficult situations. So I think I just give that piece of freedom that can be there. And for all the women here, I think there's quite a few of us, we can find our freedom even in the face of gender discrimination. We can find it, and we get on with being who we want to be in the world and offering what we want to offer. And we choose to practice compassion and service. And when we find that freedom, nothing can hold us back to realize our true kind of capacity. And it really is possible. So, good luck.
Dear Thai, dear family, Sangha, brothers and sisters, my name is Kathleen. My question is about personal practice in the face of attachments that seem impossible to release. I have the capacity to take this practice home and do well for a time, and then get caught in suffering or busyness or the West or a screen, and not find my way back for a while. While I've been here, we have touched on the strength of our ancestors and healing their suffering with love and freedom. And while that has been a strong practice for me in the past, of recent it has been difficult because of sickness in my family. And that is the suffering that I am attached to, and the mental formations that I have been reviewing to try and let go, so that I can be this beautiful light in the West. I have been blessed to have the experience of shining. Family expectations are difficult when others have decided that families of origin are just done. The blocks are in place for safety. So there is no relationship with daughter, mother, grandchild. My practice does not feel strong enough to overcome that on certain days. When I'm here, whew, with the support of this, doable. But when I go home, my fear is that I'll lose my strength and not find my way Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Is there anybody here who doesn't have any problem with screen addictions? Can you raise your hand? Do you see anyone? I don't. There's one. Okay, maybe you need to ask them. It's not easy. We are dealing with a technology which has been designed to addict us to it. So, and it's the first time, right? I mean, it's new. First iPhone was 2008. It's pretty recent. And so we may need to get more creative as practitioners together to figure out, how do we want to deal with these things, these challenges. I know the feeling of failing, or of feeling like I've lost my practice. And I know the fear of that, the fear of doing that again. And I found a way to turn that around for myself, because there is one thing that I know from my deepest moments of suffering, which is that I will always get up again. And I don't know how I know that, but I do know it, and I think you know it too. See, so falling down doesn't matter. We may fall down, but will we get up? Yeah. That is what is important. That is the ground on which we can stand. Because, and I don't see that, when I recognize that in myself, I don't see it as mine. That's not about me. That's not about my character or, building myself up and saying, oh, I'm strong, I'm someone who will always get up. No. It's about recognizing that there is something inherent to all of us, to life itself, that tends towards awakening. I don't know how else to say it. It's seeing the Buddha nature in all things. Sometimes it's easier to see it out there, but when I say all things, I have to include this. The part of reality that I'm most harsh about. I have to see that, when I can see the nature of awakening in an ant, in a leaf, in a little child. It's so clear, it's shining. But I have to include myself in that. And I can see that. I have a lot of evidence that I always get up again. Yeah. And that gives me a feeling of there's something unbreakable in us that no one can take away. There's something that can, I believe, transcend injustice, oppression, death even. Indestructible. And when there are obstacles in our way, or someone has cut off communication or a relationship and said no more, there's a level on which, okay, that relationship seems to be blocked. But I also see that there's a part of us which is a bit more like the mycelial networks. that can never be cut off, right? No matter what it looks like on the surface, underneath at a deeper level, there are ways in which we are connected that cannot be severed. And they may not be obvious or recognized by everyone, and they may not take the form of a phone call or an email or a text message or a conversation, but that doesn't mean to say that those connections are not there. And in the very hardest relationships that we have sometimes in our families, I find it helpful to distinguish between the sort of outer form of the relationship and the inner dimension of the relationship. And no one can stop me from continuing to heal that relationship in my heart. No one can take that away from me. No one can prevent me from doing that. And so in my practice of touching the earth, I find that there's no limit to my ability to reconcile the wounds, of my childhood and in my family. So yeah, as Sister True Dedication was saying, that freedom, I have that freedom, and it's something that no one can take away from me, even if they say, "I don't want to talk to you anymore." I could still, there's a human part of sadness to that as well, which you have to acknowledge. It's not to deny that, but to say, okay, I accept, I will also take care of that feeling, that sorrow, but there's another route, there's an underground connection that I can still, cultivate and nourish and celebrate. And maybe in this lifetime, that relationship will not be restored. But I don't, limit myself to that either, right? Because there's a kind of love that we've been hearing about, the radical love, limitless love, that can also transcend lifetimes. And I think we know that, when we touch that in our hearts, that spirit of love, of generosity, we know its infinitude, its infiniteness directly. It doesn't need to be verified by anyone else, right? We can feel it. Yeah. Thank you.
Dear Thai, dear Sangha, Brother Phap, yesterday during your Dharma talk, you mentioned the kind of difficulty and aversion to incorporating like a spiritual dimension. And I've noticed like a similar kind of aversion to kind of bringing in a more like spiritual dimension, or just like deep looking and deep understanding kind of in all areas of life, especially when it's looking at ourselves as individuals and maybe like our own suffering or the way we're living that might be harmful. And so my question is kind of to hear, I guess, your thoughts on how we can bring in and cultivate and kind of invite a more spiritual kind of dimension or deep looking and deep understanding into like, because I think often we might be living in a way that's harmful and we kind of know that, but like maybe like we don't go beyond that, or so I guess like how do we kind of bring in that deep looking and deep understanding into all areas of life and kind of inviting more of a spiritual dimension even when it's difficult and kind of aversive, just because I feel like the deep looking and deep understanding is like so important kind of where we are now. And I know sometimes the aversion to like looking at ourselves if it's harmful is in terms of like environmental issues is because like mainly it is corporations and industries that have the biggest impact, but that doesn't mean there's still things that we can do or contribute. So I guess like how we can bring in more of a spiritual dimension and deep looking and deep understanding. So I guess an example, like if we are living more simply, like there's kind of an aversion to that. I think especially in maybe communities that are more privileged and we kind of know we're living in a way that's harmful and we don't really want to let go of that. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can bring in like more of a spiritual dimension and deep looking and deep understanding when there is kind of the like aversion to it, because it might become like touchy or uncomfortable kind of.
So thank you for your question. When I was first introduced to the practice of deep looking while eating, I actually found it really hard because when I looked deeply into the food, what I saw was, petro-capitalism and a kind of chain of, direct to the shelf delivery. I saw exploitation of farm workers, I saw pesticides, and I saw, the kind of abuse even of the plants and other living beings that we kind of squeeze every last drop of life out of. I saw tomatoes in greenhouses, the roots never touch the ground, they're just fed hydroponic solutions of nutrients. And so I saw suffering, and I kind of didn't want to see that every time I ate. So I found it very hard, and Thai would say, look in the lettuce leaf and see the cloud and the sun and the moon. And I'd be like, yeah, but what about the truck that delivered it? And, what about the roads that were built? And what about the supermarkets? And what about, exploitation of labor? And, I was like, are we just going to ignore all of that and just look at the nice stuff? It didn't seem to make sense to me. So it took me a while to see that. Because I kept doing it, right? Because I was here in Plum Village, I had no choice. I was doing it, eating meditation every day, and okay, I got to look deeply into that. I kind of don't like it; it makes me suffer, but I'm going to keep doing it. Thai said I have to do it, so all right. Because I trusted Thai. He was like, if he says it, there must be a reason, so I'm just going to keep going. And at a certain point, I felt like the suffering of our modern capitalist economy, in the way that we have kind of abused nature and twisted plants and animals to provide more and more nutrition just for our species, is there. I can't deny it, but it's like a thin film on, when I look in deep time at a tomato. You know, a tomato is the product of more than 1 billion years of evolution. There is still so much beauty and grace and cosmicness in a tomato. And it's not that the suffering isn't there, but for me now, like the beauty is so much more vast than this little film of kind of distortion and pollution that we've added on top of it. And I think that's true of all of us, in a sense, of humanity as well, in the way that we're living right now. You know, maybe when we get on a plane, there is a part of us that doesn't want to look too deeply because it's uncomfortable. You know, it brings up, it's like, we want to justify it very quickly. Say, oh, well, I'm going to a retreat. You know, so, you know, it's kind of okay, right? I'm doing something good. But I think we can look a little bit deeper, and we can ask ourselves the hard questions. In the 1990s, BP spent more than $100 million on an advertising campaign to create the notion of carbon footprint. And they did it very deliberately, you know, to put the weight of responsibility and blame on the consumers. You know, so they knew that they couldn't get away from the notion that using petrochemicals is, you know, causing greenhouse gas emissions, which is affecting our whole planet. The extraction is polluting, and so they knew they couldn't hide from that, but they had a way to handle it just to keep going a little bit longer so they could keep making profits. Let's just pass the blame onto all the consumers. And we'll just say, well, you know, if we don't want to continue to extract petrochemicals, then you can stop. It's up to you. It's up to the consumers. And I think we have internalized a little bit that notion. And so we have a lot of guilt, a lot of shame around the way our society is functioning. But when we understand how that was done, and with what kind of, it was very deliberate. They were very smart. You know, they knew exactly what they were doing. So I think we can reclaim that notion of carbon footprint, and we sometimes talk about the notion of karmic footprint. And so it's not to deny our carbon footprint, because it is there, and we do need to account for it individually and as organizations. But it's to see that it's not the whole picture, and that our karmic footprint can also have a negative aspect, but it can have a positive aspect, and a vast one. Right? If we are starting to cultivate mindfulness in our lives, and starting to cultivate Sangha, and practice, and choosing with, you know, a little bit more intention what we do and what we don't do, choosing to cultivate kindness, to cultivate deep listening, to use speech in a way that nourishes hope and joy in others rather than, you know, shaming and blaming and criticizing. All of these things are part of our karmic footprint. And you know, when I look at myself, I sometimes wonder, how did I get to be here? You know, I feel so lucky that I somehow sort of ran into this stream of practice. I met this community, and then was just sort of drawn into it over a few years. I feel like it would have been so easy to miss that, you know, and to just do other stuff and never to encounter this deep river of ancient wisdom. Or maybe I could have just bounced off it, sort of touched it and not realized that I could join it, you know. And so I asked myself, how did that happen? And I really have to look back at my ancestors, and I see it's their karmic footprint, you know. I don't know what they did. Maybe they saved a mouse or something. You know, saved enough worms, or, you know, were kind enough to each other, or, you know, But there's something which has given me the immense good fortune to get to encounter this practice, just to have the chance to cultivate it a little bit in this lifetime. And so, yeah, that helps me to counterbalance some other thoughts that I might have about my family. You know, that maybe, I have a grandfather who worked in the petrochemical industry, and so there was some money on one side of my family that we all, to some extent, benefited from, but I feel like it's tainted. It's like based on extraction of oil, and I could feel very aversive about that. I don't want to, look too deeply, but I think like deep looking doesn't put us in touch only with the negative, right? So we have to widen our view. And it's not to ignore the negative, but it's to allow it to be with all of the beauty, which there may be dimensions of it that we haven't opened ourselves up to yet. Sort of dimensions in time, in terms of our ancestors and descendants, and also in space, in our interdependence with other forms of life. We are more than human, right? So when we look in the human realm, we can sometimes hate ourselves and feel like there's too much suffering, like we've caused too much harm, maybe the world would be better off without us. But we're not only human, fortunately. And I want to be in touch with the suffering, I want to look at it clearly, but in order to do that, I need the immensity of the joy and the beauty and the kind of the love of life itself, of Mother Earth, the creativity, the inclusiveness and stability of Mother Earth. So in my deep looking, I try to keep that balance. I try to keep checking, like, am I nourishing myself enough with these sources of positive energy.
I have one thing to add, because also in the question I heard, how can we bring a spiritual dimension into those places where it's hard to bring it? And so for me, I was curious, is it your school or college, or is it your workplace or a political setting? And actually building on what Brother Spirit was sharing about yesterday and meeting the CEOs, actually, it is totally possible for each one of us to bring in a spiritual dimension to our workplace. And there was something that one of the CEOs said at that dinner, and she was saying, don't think that we're all here just to make profit. And this was also something that Satish Kumar was mentioning, like our economies are not just to make money, they're also to make meaning and value and to enrich ourselves as a culture. So each one of us, in whatever team or community we are within our daily life, don't think that it's only the project or the work or the task that you are doing, or the profit at the end of the quarter, I think you call it, or the KPI. I don't know if any of you know what a KPI is. I recently learned about it since becoming a monastic. Key performance indicator, right? Okay, so if you're dealing with KPIs, don't think that you're going to work to improve your KPIs. You're going to work to have a human experience. You're making your life meaningful. And Tai said we have to be able to live each day deeply with meaning. And so I have experience of this when I was working in a newsroom as a journalist. I was showing up also to be human with my colleagues. They suffer. We can bring the practices of deep listening to our teams. Like, take care of the people that you see every day. Ask them really meaningful questions, like, is this what you saw? Is this kind of job what you would see yourself doing when you were younger? Like, why are you still here? Like, what gives you meaning here? Like, what gives you meaning in doing this? And like, you can literally ask that in your coffee break or your lunch break to your colleagues, and just take the level of connection a bit deeper. Don't talk about work in your break. Like, ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they're in touch with their parents. Ask them how they, like, do they spend time in nature and go exploring in their vacation? Like, what to them is their quality downtime? And then, like, getting curious about who you're with, and in Plum Village language would say their deepest aspiration. And one time we were invited into the offices of the Huffington Post in New York, and we met Ariana Huffington and then a whole bunch of journalists. And I think they gave us, was it 45 minutes with them or an hour? And I was like, what can we do in 1 hour? So we did, I think, 5 minutes of meditation. And then we asked them this question, like, what's your deepest aspiration in working in journalism? And we just used all the time then to create this space of deep listening, just like the space that was created for the CEOs to share their deepest excitements and fears. And it was really extraordinary. In just 1 hour, we were in a terrible office building, and these people were able to describe what was most important to them. And at the end of the session, they were like, that was the most amazing hour I've ever had at work. I've been working with these people, I think some had been working together for 18 months, and they felt like they met their colleagues for the first time because they were hearing what makes their colleagues kind of tick. They were hearing what drives and inspires them. And each one of us here, we've learned the practices of deep listening. We know how to be authentic, and we know how to ask these questions of the people around us in a really real way. And we know how to follow our breathing while we listen. And so for me, I think some opening up these questions in our workplaces, in our teams and our projects is a really deep, simple way we can bring a spiritual dimension. And in our own view, don't measure the effectiveness of your day by the end, the means and ends, like the end of the project itself. Measure it by the quality of your relationships, the quality of your being in the day. I used to spend my lunch hour eating my homemade packed lunch in a park. And that gave my day meaning because I was with the trees, I was with the squirrels and the birds, and I could survive the newsroom like that because I wasn't losing even 1 day of sacrifice. So each one of us, we take care of our own sense of meaning, and then we really open that door for the people around us. And we're not working as, what was it Satish Kumar said? Human resources. We're not working as human, we're working as humans in relationship and creating meaning with what we're doing. That will then inform and change our work. And actually, sometimes we say, when people invite us into their corporations or organizations, we say, are you sure? Because we tend to have a not very good effect on companies, because sometimes people then wake up and they're like, why am I here? And then they kind of change job. And one time we said this to one of the big corporations that kept inviting us back and back again. And we said, every time we have to work with a new team because the last team quit. And they said, no, it's okay. We're happy that people are finding their true calling. So we're like, okay. So be ready for maybe some changes when we ask the deep questions. But this is a way to make our life meaningful and to bring that spiritual dimension in. And just to show how radically possible this is, my old boss at the BBC political newsroom invited us back in when the monastics were there in 2012 with our teacher. And I thought we would just be 3 or 4 of us and we go and say hi to my old boss. But then everyone's like, oh, we get to go to the newsroom. I want to come too. So there were 16 monastics. Went to this newsroom in Westminster, and my boss showed us around and welcomed us and brought us into one of the meeting rooms and offered us tea, and we had a deep sharing, and he was really touched. And then it was such a great moment then I was like, oh, because he was a practicing Catholic. And I was like, oh, maybe we can offer him a chant. And like, I just cannot believe this. This is why I have to kind of say it out loud. And there's some of our brothers and sisters here who were there. We then chanted, "May the day be well," to my boss in the middle of the newsroom. And he was crying, and then we were crying, I was crying. And it was just one of those miraculous moments, which is like I think literally I haven't seen my boss since then. And I know he really struggled with cancer. So I don't even know if he's still with us. But I'm so glad that we offered him all our heart and all our care, and I could repay my gratitude for everything he'd taught me. So never think that, oh, this is a space where I can't show up with my whole self. Because even monastics can do the most crazy things. And it can have meaning, and we won't regret it later. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear Sangha, for your presence, for your listening, for all of the questions. And thank you, all of the friends online, for also joining us. We take this moment to listen to 3 sounds of the bell to end our wonderful sessions of questions and answer, response, and questions from the heart. Let us connect to our breath, connect to our body, connect to the collective community that is present, embraced by this earth.